In 1872, 27 men with nothing but hand tools could raise a 100-foot railroad bridge in just 10 days. Picture a railroad crew in 1872, staring down a ravine that just swallowed their straight line on the map. Rivers, gullies, and soft ground weren't obstacles you routed around. There wasn't time for that. Between 1866 and 1873, that meant thousands of new miles, and every single one of them eventually hit water or a drop in the land. Investors didn't care, they cared about progress reports. A halted crew at the edge of a canyon wasn't just an inconvenience, it was money leaking out of the company ledger every single day. Something had to close that gap, and it had to close it fast. Stone and iron were the proper way to bridge a gap. But proper took months nobody had. Wood, on the other hand, was standing all around them. Whole forests of pine, fir, and spruce running through the Midwest, the Appalachians, and the Pacific Northwest. It was cheap, since nobody had to ship it in from a quarry three states away. It was forgiving, since green timber could be cut and shaped with basic hand tools right at the site. And it was fast, because the design itself was just the same wooden frame repeated over and over. A trestle wasn't clever engineering. It was disciplined repetition, and that's exactly what made it possible to raise in. Before any wood went up, the ground had to be dealt with. Surveyors staked out exactly where each support frame would stand. Clearing crews came through with axes and oxen, hauling brush and boulders out of the path. What happened next depended entirely on the dirt. On solid, dry ground, crews laid down massive squared timber, sometimes 8 inches by 12, seeded straight onto packed earth. There was no shortcut, and unstable footing meant a trestle that would lean, sag, or fail long before its time. There was no shortcut here. An unstable footing meant a trestle that would lean, sag. Once the footing was set, the carpenters got to work on what they called a bent, the upright frame that would eventually carry the full weight of a moving train. Every bent followed the same template. 3 heavy sill beams locked at the base. Upright posts cut from the straightest timber available. A cap beam running across the top. And diagonal braces angled at 45 degrees to keep the whole thing from twisting in the wind. Iron bolts pinned the corners. Spikes locked the joints. Carpenters shaped mortises and tenons by eye, checking each cut against a wooden pattern. It was slow, careful work on the ground, because once it left the ground, there was no. This was the part that separated a good crew from a reckless one. 2 methods dominated. The first used a gin pole, a tall single spar rigged with block and tackle, where 6 or more men hauled on ropes, while a foreman called the timing. The bent would lift clear off the ground and swing into position, guided by a rigger standing on a makeshift platform. Until iron pins dropped it into place. The second method, used when the terrain allowed it, was simpler and just as tense. Build the bent flat on grease skids. Then roll and heave it upright until it tipped into its notches. Either way, one wrong shout or one slipped rope could crush a man in seconds. With the bents standing in a row, the crew moved to tie them together. Long stringer beams were hoisted onto the cap beams and spiked down at 2-foot intervals, turning a line of separate frames into one connected structure. Then came the deck itself, timber ties laid crosswise, spaced with precision, and driven down with heavy spikes. Trackmen followed right behind, checking the gauge with a steel bar and setting the rails into place. The moment the first spike went into that rail, It usually earned a single line in the company log: "Bridge open." No ceremony, no fanfare. Just the next train rolling through on schedule. Here's what makes this genuinely hard to believe today. A crew of around 27 men could raise a 100-foot sometimes fewer if the weather cooperated. Payroll records from lines like the Erie Railroad show these gangs logging brutal 80-man days to hit that pace. Compare that to now. A modern crew with cranes and concrete still needs 3 to 4 weeks for a similar span. Plus deep engineered foundations and full safety equipment that simply didn't exist in the 1870s. These men worked without harnesses, without hard hats, balancing on pine beams above open drops. The speed wasn't a shortcut, it was survival in an industry where every idle day cost real money. Here's the part railroad companies rarely advertised. These bridges were never meant to last. Fire was a constant threat. A single spark from a passing locomotive could turn dry timber into flames within minutes. Which is why crews posted night watchmen along the longer spans. Water was just as dangerous in the opposite direction, slowly rotting sills and scouring away footings until a structure quietly began to. Newspapers from the era reported trestles lost to fire or washed out by spring floods. Sometimes internal railroad records actually called these bridges provisional, with plans already in place to replace them with stone or iron. Once the line proved it could turn a profit, timber trestles didn't stick around for long. Most were swapped out within a decade or two once traffic justified something. But the logic behind them never really disappeared. Simple tools, a repeatable design, and crews willing to work fast under real risk is still how engineering solves problems just with steel and concrete instead of pine. These weren't polished monuments. They were rough, temporary, and occasionally dangerous structures built by. What they left behind wasn't really the wood, it was the proof that a railroad and a country could move as